I'm going to open up now for Q&A. Naomi's going to come and help. We're going to do the same routine as before, handing out the green cards. The gentleman here, Naomi, and then the lady here. Okay, then we go to the... Sorry? Is that... Why don't we get the cards handed out and then see what's happening with the mic here. So yeah, the gentleman here, then the lady across here, Naomi. Yeah. We'll just get the mic fixed, and we're going to hand out 5 green cards and then 5 red. Normal hand out 5 red cards as well. Here we go. Okay. Two gentlemen. We hand out all the greens? Yeah. Okay, so then the red's over here, Norm. Is this what? Yeah, you just have to turn it on. Yeah. Okay. Just zip it down. Okay, so we're going to work through the green cards numbers first, and then the red ones, and we'll just need to be really concise to get through that number of questions. So if I can ask everyone at this stage of the day, if you can, when you ask a question, if I can just ask you to restrict yourself to one, and then we'll have one panel member. I'll seek to have one panel member respond if I can. So who's got a green one? Thank you. If you could just give your name too as you ask your question. Thanks very much, sir.
Peter Coggan. It's evident from this forum that the science is before us. The scientists do not attempt to tell the politicians what to do. The politicians and the bureaucrats decide what our society will be like. In other words, we need to mitigate the impact of what the science is telling us. What does the planner here, Brett, why are you abrogating your responsibility as a planner to push the wheel invention back to the councils when we know that the round wheel can be invented, it's already here, isn't it, by a committee of sensible people who will make wise choices if they're consulted appropriately, and that can be devolved to the appropriate councils. In other words, every council should not be asked to reinvent the wheel. What do you think of my statement?
Thank you. I think a couple of things about your statement. Firstly, the decision about the benchmarks being repealed was a decision that was made by the government. I work for the government. I work for the government, and it was a decision made by the government. There have been people here that have talked to you about some of those issues with those benchmarks and some of the implications about how those benchmarks have been applied. I suppose I keep coming back to the fact that this issue is about, from my perspective, from a planner's perspective, and I'm a planner at the state government level, there are planners at the local government level, and I think they would say the same thing. From their perspective, the issue is about where is it most appropriate to put development. Now, for any other sort of risk, that's a fairly straightforward sort of process because the risk is clear. But in this case, the risk is not clear when you start talking about where that risk might be in the future. And remember...
Draw a line on the land and say that area is going to be flooded and don't build below it.
And remember that we don't know what that risk is going to be in the future.
Science tells you.
Can I just pop in there and say that at the end of the session today, there will be the opportunity for you to have individual discussion with the panel. But there are going to be divergent views here, but we want to hear the information from the panel members, and then, as I said, there will be opportunities for you to talk to them later or subsequently, but they're adding to your body of knowledge so that when you make local decisions and participate...
Your body of knowledge is putting spurious stuff before the panel.
Sir, I'll talk to you later.
Now I'm going to go to question 2.
Abrogate the responsibility, sir. Once again.
If we can talk later, please, sir. Well, because I want to give as many people the opportunity as possible. So if we can go to question 2, thanks.
Okay, can you hear me, or have I got this? Can you hear me? No?
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Okay. My question's a little bit along similar lines, and I guess I'm a bit concerned about the way that this has been handled. No one really disputes the science. We know that climate change is happening. We know that sea level rise will inevitably increase. But it was nice to see that the scientists acknowledge that there's a level of uncertainty and variability there. And I guess I would have been more interested to hear from people like Brett and his ilk in terms of what are we going to do about it, and what are the guidelines. So I'm sorry, I'm going to break your rule of only one question. I have 2. The first one is, how long ago were you invited onto the panel, Brett? Because you seem to be a late entry. I hope that's not too cheeky. One of the problems that we've had, particularly in this council, is that a lot of the angst that's been generated around the sea level rise policy has been councils being somewhat overzealous in the way that they develop their own policy. So I'm hoping that on your risk register, you've talked a lot about risk and mitigating risk, that you'll have some controls for councils that seem to go too far. It's great that you protect people from being eventually washed away by sea level, but there are gradations in there. And yes, if we only plan for sea level rise for 2600 or whatever, that's probably not the right thing to be doing for 2014. So I was hoping you could respond to those.
Sorry, Brett, I'm probably in a little bit better position to answer this one here. Eurobodalla Council actually should be commended at the moment, because they're actually undertaking a study that's a landmark study that's being 50-50 funded by Office of Environment and Heritage to actually get to the heart of exactly those sorts of things, looking at the evidence-based sea level rise that should be used for planning purposes and for strategic planning. And every other coastal council in New South Wales is looking toward the outcome of that study. And yes, look, you can certainly argue that that's probably a role that the state government should be doing. It's not, unfortunately. We've handed that responsibility over through our politicians to local government to come up with their own benchmarks as appropriate. Now, whether that's the right way to go or not, that's already been preordained. But I was involved on an assessment panel last year that actually allocated the money to Eurobodalla to undertake that process. And as I said, they should be commended for biting the bullet and being the first council to actually undertake that, because every other council is sitting back waiting to see what comes out of that study. And indeed, they'll be doing the hard work for everybody.
Thank you. And can we go to Brett as well? Thanks.
I was actually invited onto the panel by one of the councillors, and in fact, I think they would have liked. There was an expression that maybe you'd like to present, and I said, I don't see the value in me presenting, because what am I going to say other than the state government has said that councils need to have a way in which they manage the risk, and then to understand what that risk is, both now and into the future. Now, councils have a reasonably good understanding of what the risks are associated with the coast now, because they've got their floodplain risk management plans. In some cases, there's coastal zone management plans. They understand the areas of coastal instability. They understand from history where there are issues. It's that impact into the future, and how do you predict that, and how do you assess that? And that is not something that planning has that expertise in. We are reliant on the scientists to give us an understanding as to how we factor that into our assessment. So how do we factor that into where that line should be drawn, and then using our risk management approach, say, all right, that's the line there. Is that the right line? Does that mean that we should be looking at no development beyond that line, or should we be looking at some development beyond that line depending on what the nature of that risk is? And trying to strip it back, that's what council's policies are all about. It's no different, I suppose, to if you're going to build in an area that's potentially affected by bushfire because you're close to the bush. It's no different to that approach of saying this is an area that's affected by that and this is the council setting what the appropriate setbacks and distances are. It's not something that is best done at a state level or at a regional level. It's something that's best done at a local level because there are local decisions that need to be made, particularly in terms of how and these are the decisions that your councillors need to make. Are they going to protect some areas or are they going to retreat for some areas? And that's why we've been saying that it's a decision that's best taken at the local level.
I'd just like to make a comment around that as well, in that there's an Australian standard on risk management and in particular even adapting to climate change and sea level rise. Those are very generic and like state guidelines have been talking about sea level rise and how to manage the coast for a long time. At a generic level, there's only so far you can go. So I totally agree with Brett. It's not until you get into a specific area and look at a particular case study. It doesn't even matter if it's a house with or without a seawall, or a hospital with or without a seawall, or a public amenity that you want to protect. It comes down to the community values of that particular location and the decisions that that community makes about whether they protect that particular asset or whether they abandon that asset or whether they look at other solutions to provide what the community in that area wants. The processes that you go through, the thinking processes that you go through need to be based on good science, need to be transparent, need to be rational, but you can't tell people what to do at Bateman's Bay, whether or not to build a seawall to protect a road. It's going to come down to that community.
Okay, now I'm going to move us on to question 3. I've been quite flexible there because obviously there's a lot of interest in that particular issue, but who's got question 3? Sir, thank you. If you could just give us your name.
Ross Hayward from Rowley. I came along here today hoping to get a number that I could comfortably take home with me so I could feel nice and fuzzy. But I've been hit by a tsunami. And what am I going to do about it? Well, first thing I'm going to do is congratulate the council for assembling such a heavyweight panel of experts, from scientists, the Insurance Council, engineers, planners, the works. I just wish that there were more people here. I'm glad there was a lot of people here earlier. I know they were all gone. It's probably very heavy for them, but I can understand now that what's come across today is the variability, the number of factors I had no idea about. And so council just has to wait until the fog sort of diminishes a bit so they can see their way clear, and I feel for them in trying to keep the business on the road of council while they're trying to make decisions about all these things, waiting for the information. Yet we can't expect the scientists and the engineers to flick their fingers and come up with the answers overnight. So I'm going to be interested to see a couple of things happen. Number one, the local paper, which really got my interest in this going over the last 18 months, 2 years, I suppose, with correspondence to the letters, the editor, and now its title changed a lot of, excuse the language, crap, it's not going to happen, etc., etc. I'm wondering whether I'm going to hear a feet changing from taking one foot out of the mouth and putting the other one in, or whether the sceptics are just going to keep wading into the water until it's over above their head and we won't hear from them again. So that's one thing. Yeah, they're dreaming, I think. But I really appreciate the council doing this today, putting it on, and I can tell you I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Who's got the green 4?
Thank you. I'm going to take it back, Thank you. It's been very interesting today, but I think apart from the scientific sort of information we've had, there's not much chance we can do about it except nudging the moon. I'd like to see you nudge the moon and change the tides. But on a local basis, it's a council issue and it's a citizen issue. And it's getting confidence in this council and the council before it and the council after it, which we may or may not happen, in the planning of the situation. And the confidence, in my opinion, of the community with handling this climate change issue and sea level rise is absolutely dismal. It's absolutely dismal because there's been many faults found in the negotiating aspects of the council, their introduction to the community and the issues involved. I heard Mr Whitworth mention his department being involved in putting out a submission and on the 149 certificates just recently. And of course, I had a meeting with my learned colleague here with 2 ministers and a heap of planners there. And there were 71 submissions out of the total submissions called for. And it's getting the confidence of the people. The planning department puts it on the government website. Nobody in the Eurobodalla Council, but a few knew. The councillors weren't even told by the general manager there were submissions being called for. We get to a situation like that where an important issue on climate change comes down to political planning, and the political planning process overtakes what all the science is going to say, no matter what they say, whether it's happened before or anything like that. Ice underneath and ice on the top, it doesn't make much difference. But if you want the community on side and you want to protect people, we've got to do something about it. The planners are the people that are doing it. They shouldn't persecute the population that pays them on a local basis. The general manager should listen to what people say. The council is elected at the moment. I've addressed council on many occasions, and you wouldn't believe it, not one question comes from the councillors themselves. When you point out something, I don't say I'm right all the time, I'm probably wrong all the time, but at least they should introduce a little bit of community communication to the people that it is going to affect. In the matter of in the Eurobodalla, Mr Whitworth's department, right, he's in charge of Wollongong. We had a meeting with him once and we virtually got the short shift, and the short shift was on the South Hills Regional Strategy and the LEP, where very little research was done and was obvious to people, to us, and we represented a number of people. There's many other issues. Just recently, there's been a...
Did you have a particular question?
Well, the panel is, apart from the scientists, and Mr Whitworth is there representing the New South Wales Planning Department, which I believe has been amalgamated now under one minister. It is no longer the Planning Department. It was previously a Heritage, and also, what was the other one? No, I don't know, but there's 3. One minister is replacing 3. So that political planning is changing all the time. And that new process and that new government structure has got to perform a little bit better with their communications to the people as the hierarchy above the local council. And of course the local council shouldn't be in collusion with them. If they feel it's not right for the local community, they shouldn't do it.
Okay,
thank you.
Take that as a comment, and then can I go to the number 5? Is there a question there, sir?
I have, this is directed at Mr Whitworth. You said that there's a requirement for solid evidence when assessing the future risk of sea level rise. Can you give me a yes or no answer? Do you regard Dr Church's IPCC projections as solid evidence for the purpose of planning?
Yes or no? That's a bit like, is there a sandbag up there? But if I say yes, it's, if I say...
Please, if we can let Brett answer, just give Brett... Please give Brett time to respond, thanks.
Yes, I do. I mean, I think that the science is saying that there is a definite change in climate, and that the New South Wales government has recognised that. What we're saying here, and I'm still puzzled about. I know that all comes back to where these lines are and how they affect people. I appreciate that, and I just don't know where that line is most appropriately drawn, taking into account the different perspectives. So, okay.
Can I just make... Sorry, you go, John.
I might be biased in this, but in my view, there is no better evidence available, no better basis for planning than what is available through the IPCC. The CSIRO is currently in the role of task of projecting regional sea level rise at the Australian scale. These are not all that different to what the IPCC has done. There's no credible alternative. Now, there are uncertainties in what we can say. We would like to be able to be more precise, but that's unrealistic to expect that to happen. There's been significant improvements in our understanding of the science over the last decade or so, and there's plenty of information about how sea level is changing and will change, and it's sufficient, I feel, for councils to consider and for state governments to consider as well as to what the appropriate response is. No, it's not perfect, but it's the best we have.
Now, I'm going to pause us there and I'm going on to the next question. So who's got red 1? Thank you.
Right, straight. Dr. Church, towards the end of your presentation, you put up a slide that showed a marked difference between the ranges of sea level rise predictions that are coming out of the proxy models or the computer models compared to what I think you described as the process-related science. And along the way, you made a couple of passing comments about the IPCC predictions this time round regarded as probably still too conservative. Would you mind just elaborating on that? And in particular, would you care to comment on the observation that was made by the chief scientist and engineer that's given rise to the changes in the policy, that last time around, particularly when we got beyond 2050, the sort of computer modelling that was done was a bit too thin on the ground. My quick reading of your chapter suggests that this time round there's a lot more data, or there's a lot more computer-generated data. Is that correct?
Thank you.
Thanks for the question and the opportunity to clarify. So we had two sets of projections to consider, one based on our physical understanding and process-based models, and they're the main projections that we present. The other set of projections were what are called semi-empirical models, so statistical models relating observed sea level to observed temperatures, and they result in much higher projections, and we have lack of confidence in those higher projections. Compared to the last report, the fourth assessment report, they actually came to the decision that they did not know enough about ice sheets to incorporate those in the projections. And so the projections from the fourth assessment report did not include the dynamic response of ice sheets, and as a result, the remaining components contributing to sea level rise, the projections were smaller than in the current report. We have significantly more information this time around because of that lack of knowledge identified in the last report has really focused the scientific effort. The information, though, is incomplete. We would have liked to have had more, particularly for Antarctica. I'm not sure that I've fully answered your question. I think I probably have.
Thank you. Now, who's got red 2?
one of the reasons we're here today is to try and establish how we can plan for impending sea level rise. Nobody's suggesting it's not going to happen. One of the problems I got is before the break, Dr. Church said that we need records of 100 years. If we don't have 100-year records, then all we're doing is having water sloshing around in the bath, and you can't really get a proper answer on that. If I read report MHL 1881 from Manly Hydraulics say that you have to have 40 years of data to be able to make an accurate, have accurate evidence on where the sea level rise is going. If I read the report that I mentioned before from Mr. Watson, he's suggesting nothing less than 30 years. Now I have a problem with this because if I look at Port Denison, that over the last 90 years, the sea level rise has been on average 0.94 of a millimetre a year. If I have a look at Port Kembla, they're suggesting it's 3.2, which has only been in existence for, 22, 23 years. And if we have a look at the satellite data, that's about the same. So over what period of time do planners have to have, what sort of data set do they need over what period of time to provide some semblance of evidence-based data that can be used for the planning in the future? And how often do we have to change that? Do we have 30 years to replace that every 10 years we review it again? What makes a sensible planning regime to be able to do this?
In terms of understanding sea level change, then the longer the records that we have, the better off we are, because that allows us to understand the variability. I think you asked essentially the same question before, the difference between the sea level record after 1993 and the Sydney record. Both Port Denison and Port Kembla show essentially the same rate of rise when you compare them over the same period. If you want to compare them over different periods, compare apples and oranges, you will get different answers, and that's to be expected. The use of the records to understand the current risk from extreme events and how they impact society today, that's the type of information that Carl Sullivan is useful to him to inform insurance decisions, and they're also, local records are also useful for understanding sea level change. But as a linear projection, no matter what the period is, that's not the appropriate means for projecting future sea level change. It's just ignoring the majority of the evidence we have, throwing it away and basing projections on a very small part of the information base, not the optimum approach.
I just had a very brief comment to that historicals looking back and future climate, we know climate's changing, it's been changing for thousands and millions of years, for millennia. The past is not necessarily a good reflection of what climate's doing in the future, and that's really where the models that IPCC are working with in understanding, so using the models to calibrate to the past and then projecting to the future. It's really the only way we're going to get a better handle.
Okay, thank you, John. Who's got question 3?
Margaret Perger from Maruya. I'd firstly like to also congratulate Eurobodalla Council, but also Shoalhaven Council, who've combined with Eurobodalla to cover the very expensive cost of working this information locally. Now, I'm pleased to hear they're getting half the money back, but if state has shifted the responsibility to local council, why doesn't local council get all the money to do the work?
If I can just maybe put that in perspective, the grant that was issued to Eurobodalla and Shoalhaven jointly was under the Coastal Management Program. Now that's an annual allocation from Treasury under the guidelines of 1:1 funding, and that can't be changed unless the government decides to change how they allocate the money from one budget to another. That's the constraints, and that's the way in which that program at the moment is delivered. So the government are looking, as part of the Stage 2 coastal reforms, at a range of different funding models for being able to look at studies and implement capital works, but that's in the realm of the Ministerial Coastal Task Force at the moment. But at the moment they're constrained with regard to the Treasury allocation and the funding requirements of that particular grant program.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Now, who's got red 3?
4.
Sorry, so red 4.
So do I just talk? Oh, yeah. So I've got 2 questions. One was kind of related a little bit to the last one, and that is, I understand, like with coastal engineering and that kind of thing, you can make some predictions with reasonable accuracy of what the coastal erosion is going to be. I think the slide that you showed of the east coast of the US, I think that's just normal coastal erosion. Yep. Nothing to do with sea level. So those sorts of things are a local issue which, understandably, local government should be expected to do the studies for and take on those outcomes of whatever those studies show. The actual Eurobodalla Council, from what I can understand, is making a prediction of what they think sea level will be in 50 and 100 years' time, based on whoever they choose to listen to. I think Dr. Church just said something, there's a 67% accuracy of sea level rise being at a certain level in 100 years' time. That's not very high. 67% sounds high, but 50% is there's an equal chance of it being reducing. As opposed, 75% is more like what you would think of 50%. But at the moment, with the local government, if anybody with a designated block chooses to do any development, there is a 100% probability they will be paying additional cost based on, not on the current erosion which is going on, but a predicted or estimated or guesstimated assessment of what coastal erosion will be in 50 and 100 years' time. So my first question is, why is the local government having to pay for costs associated with determining the level of sea level rise, which should be, Australian government cost or a New South Wales government cost at least, not a local government cost? We don't have, we don't have the learned people in our government, the local government, doing this determination, and we shouldn't be having to pay people to estimate what's happening in the world to come up with a local, guesstimate. And the second question is the actual cost of upgrading your development to meet the estimation which the local government will make, which is going to cost more, has to be a requirement for 100 years' time. If it doesn't happen, there's a lot of money that's being spent now. Why are we spending that money? But the economics, it seems like you're making estimates whether the building will be there or not, but not the actual useful life of the building and the actual risk.
The chance of sea level falling is next to zilch. Sea level will not be falling. It will fall locally, so places like Stockholm already have falling sea level. But for the majority of places around the world, including Australia, the chance of a sea level fall are minimal.
Thanks, John.
I just make a small comment about the impact of sea level rise on the coast. I mean, certainly the reason I put those slides up wasn't to say that sea level rise was causing that erosion. The drivers for long-term recession are a long-term loss of sand. Beaches that are continually eroding, it's because sand is being transported away from those areas, or sea levels are rising, and both are kind of similar. Erosion will impact beaches more with higher sea levels. So the reason I showed those are to look at the impacts. Now, the whole discussion about where the hazard line is with or without sea level rise and all of those things, it really comes down to what development. It's not about a line as such. It talks about it really should be about what is it you want to do at that location and what risk are you prepared to take given what we know about sea level rise. So in other words, if you're building something there with a design life of 20 years and after those 20 years you're quite prepared to rebuild it again, you're going to have a very different consideration for sea level than if something that you want to be there for 100 or 200 years. So it's not a line as such, and I think, Brett and the state government are struggling to communicate the fact that it's not one line as such. It's about the local decisions about what you want to do with that, with those areas, and the information is available, but the decisions need to be made locally.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Now, has someone got the number 5 card?
No, but I've got the second part of my question, but
I can ask you to make it fairly.
I will. And it was really, like more about the planning and the risk mitigation. Now, the problem is, from what's happened with Eurobodalla, from what I understand, we need to engage a coastal engineer. Now, that coastal engineer, from my understanding, will make an assessment of the risk of losing the building. He won't make an assessment of the cost of if the building is going to be lost or not. What's that cost to you? Like, for instance, in Ballina, you can see that the council has come up with a strategy. The insurance have gone up for the places where the council designated that's a flood area and that's not. So the people who were in that flood, potential flood area, the 5% range, were going to pay a lot more. With the land at the moment, okay, you engage a coastal engineer, he'll say, okay, what's the probability of this land being eroded? Okay, if it's going to be eroded, then you've got to do this. But in 50 years' time, almost 100% chance that I won't be around. In 100 years' time, I can guarantee I won't. So the life of the building lasting 50 or 100 years to me is not a huge thing that I want to spend an extra 20% now on the top of the cost of the building to build a building for something that may or may not happen.
I'll give you...
If you've got anything to add there,
I'll answer that by a case study example. So we're designing a seawall at the moment in Port Macquarie, and that seawall has zero allowance for sea level rise. Okay, it's a brand new seawall and it's completely compliant, but we've assessed the serviceability of that structure under a high level scenario projection of sea level rise. We've built into that structure a design to be able to be adapted for future sea level, and we've defined triggers of damage that council can then, when that damage occurs, based on an economic analysis, they can then implement those adaptation measures without detracting from the current amenity of the area, without over-designing a structure and making full allowance for future projections of sea level. And that's an example. Right? But every location will be different depending on what you're looking at.
Okay, thanks, Ed. Over to the gentleman here.
I'd just like to thank Council for getting you guys down here. I think it's been good for all of us that's here. One thing you've touched on is, from a planning point of view, put the pressure onto Council as far as risks go. The problem down here is they seem to work out a fear of worst case scenario and slow things down, and you have to have a lot of studies done. At the moment, environment reports and fire reports are around $10,000 each at the cheapest. You then add in a sea level rise report on each property. Is there a way that you can then put the risk onto the developer? I think, like Ed was saying there, if we're happy to do a 20-year development or a 50-year development and the sea does rise, it's up to us to remove it. We've got contractual rights, something set in place that council don't slow down the development process or hinder you putting a normal house on a normal block of land apart from the fact it's within 1 metre of the sea level rise. The other issue we've got down here that hasn't been sort of touched on, which I'm happy with the science behind the sea level rise, whether it's right or wrong, in 50 years' time we'll find out then. We've also got the marine park down here that you can't develop within 100 metres of the marine park, whether you're 50 metres up, I'm guessing, or one metre above sea level. What effect does the development have on the marine park that's got no scientific proof behind it when you're standing on... Sorry? Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I'm not going to address the question about the marine park because I don't know anything about the marine park and the issue that you're raising. But it is possible in the development that you're making, and Council's local environmental plan does allow this to happen, to say that this is a temporary use, temporary be 20 years, temporary be 30 years, etc. And then to identify the designs and the way the structure is built on that basis. I would expect that council and I don't know how council's individual policy will work. I know that they've got variations in terms of their interim sea level rise and how their new policy will work, whether it still maintains that variation, but it keeps coming back to the nature of the development that you want to build. What sort of consequence will it have is if there is an event occurring? That's the nub of the issue that council's policy needs to address, and it needs to be written in a smart way that it can cope with subdivisions and residential flats all the way through to boat houses and so on. And I'm confident that it can do that.
Just adding further to that, the current consultant engagement with Whitehead and Associates on behalf of Shoalhaven and Eurobodalla councils, the draft brief addresses all of the concerns that you've raised there and is heading more towards that, looking at an overall policy for both councils that addresses all the different circumstances that arise over time. So again, yes, it's probably something the state and planning and others should have been doing but aren't and won't. So all I can do is just commend both Eurobodalla and Shoalhaven councils for the initiative that they've taken up, and that work will be probably finalised closer towards the middle of this year, in the second half. So, I mean, that work is underway, I can assure you.
Thank you, Bill. So we've covered a lot of information this afternoon, and I've let us go over because it was very important to get the number of questions answered. I just want to remind you that when I do wrap the session up quite soon, that the panel are going to be available for individual questions. I just want to see if there is, from someone who hasn't yet had the opportunity to ask a question, I just want to see whether there's one last question from someone who hasn't yet had a chance. And then other than that, I'm going to ask if you can direct your questions to the panel members as I wrap the session up. As I said, I shortened afternoon tea and have extended to give you the maximum time to have the questions. So we'll just take the one last one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've been looking on the net ever since I came down here some years ago, and I've been looking for one of the... So my question is to have my needs met in, say, 20 years' time in a major event where we could be flooding. I come from an area that floods often, so I know all about floods, and I know that all the ridges will be flooded and the sea rises, and so, okay, I can live on a ridge. And I might need to buy a canoe or a motorboat to get to the grocery shopping, but I want to know whether the New South Wales government is planning to raise the Pacific Highway, because if you drive from Eden up to Sydney, there are so many places I can see that will be under the water, guaranteed, in even 10 years' time. And I want to know whether they planning for that yet?
Thank you. Brett?
There's a project that's going on, not probably Stolefields funded on this, but I know about it because I'm on the steering committee. Office of Environment and Heritage coordinated
an integrated regional vulnerability assessment for the southeast in terms of the impacts of a changing climate. They are now moving to and they produced a report which is available on the Office of Environment and Heritage webpage. They're now moving to the next step in that, which is an adaptation strategy for the southeast. It's got the catchy title of EASE, Enabling Southeast Adaptation Environment, I think. I can't remember what the E stands for. But in that, a number of the state government agencies are consulted, and this has been an interesting exercise to raise the awareness of the impacts of sea level rise with agencies like Roads and Maritime Services, and to see the penny drop where they go, oh, okay, well, we got a number of bridges or a number of roads that are actually susceptible to risk, or not just susceptible to sort of inundation, but that their processes for maintenance and renewal are going to have to be looked at as well. And that's just one of a number of others. The marinas, the electricity providers, the water and sewer providers, etc., all part of that process.
Thanks, Brett. Now, you've all heard of last questions, and you've probably heard of last. So I've got one last from the
Thank you very much. My name's Damien Rogers. I'd just like to say, when the last council election was on, I was running for council there. There was a man came up to me in Batemans Bay and told me how he had a very expensive property locally. He'd only bought a few years before the sea level rise legislation came in. He just sold it for $1 million loss off the purchase price, the original purchase price. We've had the local insurance valuers tell us that these restrictions being put on land, whether it's sea level rise or all these other biodiversity or whatever else they've come up with, the combination of all those was going to cost this area, the homeowners, $1 billion. That was their estimate, $1 billion off the value of their properties. Now, we know that a lot of this stuff has failed to appear, or your sea level rise stuff has just been a dud, the climate change is a dud, everything's failed. The IPCC is becoming a joke, we know that. But there's one very important thing that you've touched on, and that's the risk management. Risk management, there's I don't know if you're familiar with the 50-to-1 project, but it's based on accepted figures by the IPCC and known accepted figures from the government, estimating the cost of mitigation compared to the cost of doing nothing. And not just doing nothing, but reacting if and when there is a problem and fixing the problem. It's 50-to-1. 50 times more expensive to do this stuff you're doing now than to do nothing and react and fix the problem if and when it occurs. You've got Holland, which is, underwater, and they've mitigated all the possible flooding in Holland for, hundreds of years or something? We are capable of fixing any problem. You're wiping out people's assets, their primary asset, their life savings, on a massive scale, on a 50-to-1 basis. It's totally baseless. It's ludicrous. It's crazy.
Okay, can I just ask whether there's anyone from the panel who wants to add anything in relation to that matter? No,
I'll just make one throwaway comment. I'm by no means an expert in global economics or anything else, but I did quote one reference I've read in the Stern Review, and I understand there's new work being done continuously on this that clearly demonstrates the point you made about reaction versus adaptation. The cost of reaction is an order of magnitude more expensive than mitigating or adapting before the event. We know that from emergency management with flooding. We know that from all of our experience looking back, and I can't see any reason why it would be cheaper to react in the future than it would be to adapt now. It's really just about making practicable, risk-based decisions based on consequences and evidence.
Thank you, Ed, and I am going to. Excuse me. I'm going to wrap this up there, and as I said earlier, the presenters have very generously offered to stay around to answer individual questions. I'd like to thank you all for attending. It's obviously a very complex topic, and as we said earlier, there are divergent views. I think as I think the panel. I think the panel.
No one can do that.
The panel have put forward their view about that particular report and about the science, and there are divergent views, and that is to be expected. But what I want to do is to thank you for attending. I want to particularly thank the panel members and the speakers for their time this afternoon.